Mike Schmidt, take us through this piece of reporting from you and your colleagues about Garland's probe into the insurrection that now at least seems to touch on questions about Trump's conduct.
What my colleagues wrote about today is basically the concern in the department about how it was drawn into partisan politics in extraordinary ways dating back all the way to 2015. And look, whether the department did the right thing or the wrong thing, or whether, the attacks on it were justified or not, the department found itself in the midst of politics in ways that basically led Joe Biden to run on a platform of trying to reset the department and depoliticize it, and led to the choice of Merrick Garland. He wanted to choose someone that was seen as apolitical, and he picked a judge, someone that would take a slow and methodical approach, similarly to how we have seen the investigation, the federal investigation, unfold in a very slow and sort of plodding pace. And this has raised questions for Garland, which he's been forced to confront in recent weeks. But at the same time, this is what Biden wanted when he ran. This was the depoliticized Justice Department that he wanted. And there may be a lot of frustration with the speed that it is proceeding at. But the biggest goal here is for, I think on the part of the Attorney General, is to keep the department out of partisan politics. That's obviously incredibly difficult to do when you're investigating someone like Donald Trump.
Dan Goldman, I'm curious your reaction to this, because I think of the Mueller probe, which went on during the Trump years, and the Mueller wasn't political. What was political was Attorney General Barr's decision to smear it, shape it, and make sure it never saw the light of day in terms of what the public understood about it. Jeff Berman at SDNY seemed to not be influenced by politics when he aggressively pursued people in Trump's circle. What was political was the man at the top, and he's gone. Does this feel like an overcorrection or learning the wrong lessons, or do you think this was what he should have done?
Well, I think I also dispute the notion that the Mueller investigation originated as an investigation with Trump. It didn't. It ultimately rose up to whether Trump and the campaign were involved, but it started with lower level staffers. And you also have to remember, it wasn't just Bill Barr. It was Donald Trump himself who pardoned Michael Flynn, who pardoned Roger Stone, who pardoned Steve Bannon. I mean, these were obvious pardons for not only his political allies, but potentially people who had incriminating information about Donald Trump himself. So Donald Trump abused the Department of Justice and politicized it. And I think that's more what Merrick Garland is pushing back on. On the other hand, anytime you're investigating a former president of the United States, it is going to be a hyper political investigation. And I think what Merrick Garland is trying to do, and frankly, part of the reason that he was selected is because he had spent 20 years as a judge and had no history of being really associated with either party. And what he's trying to do is just make sure that there is no credence to what will certainly be allegations of partisanship coming from Donald Trump and his circle. And if he can maintain the neutrality and the objectivity that the department was known for prior to Donald Trump's presidency, then he can rest assured that they're doing the right thing, no matter what allegations are flung at him from Trump and Republicans.
Mike, let me read a little bit more of what you and your colleagues are writing. If a decision were made to open a criminal investigation into Trump after he announced his intention to run in the 2024 election, as he suggests he might do, the department's leaders would have to sign off on any inquiry under an internal rule established by Bill Barr and endorsed by Garland. Wray appears to be proceeding with the same level of caution in hopes of armoring the Bureau against future attacks by making sure his agents operate by the book and keeping Justice Department leadership informed. The typically aggressive Bureau, which used every investigative tool in its arsenal during the Russia investigation, had not even opened a case targeting fake electors by early fall 2021, months after details of the wide-ranging scheme were known publicly, two former federal law enforcement officials said. If you take this piece of reporting and put it up against everything that we've seen Liz Cheney and the congressional probe push, it at least begs the question, which is unanswerable now, but if the 1-6 Select Committee didn't exist under the stewardship of Chairman Benny Thompson and the vice chair being held by Liz Cheney, would they have even gotten to this point?
Well, that's really the question, is what is the delay? What was the delay? Was the delay simply the department operating in a methodical way, or was there something larger afoot? We know that off the bat, in the days after the January 6th attack, that the department concentrated on the rioters and the militiamen. And they spent a lot of time looking at them as these people had fanned out across the country. The department Donald Trump was still in power. It was unclear what was going to happen next. His supporters had shown a willingness to use violence. They had used violence to interfere in the lawful day-to-day operations of the federal government. And the department went off in a direction. It's clear that that had some bearing on what happens in the months that followed. You see a lot of rioters get charged, a lot of, building up to these big conspiracy cases that are made against the militias for sedition. And so though that was a very important part of the investigation. Now, what we don't totally have a full picture of is why was it that other aspects of the scheme to overturn the January 6th, overturn the 2020 results, why weren't those other aspects being looked at? Were they being looked at? How were they being looked at? And were they being given the same urgency that they're now being given in the face of a congressional committee that has on a almost weekly basis raised new questions about Trump's criminality and led the public to wonder, what is the Justice Department doing about this?
Yeah, I mean, Betsy, I want to put up a timeline of what we know. I mean, obviously, DOJ operates very differently than a congressional probe, but this is the timeline of what we know. And it has there almost near the bottom outreach from the Justice Department in late June, early July to Cassidy Hutchinson. And Mike and his colleagues have also reported on how her testimony was a surprise to them, which many former DOJ alumni find kind of horrific, that they weren't aware of the substance of what she testified to. But she does what Mike's talking about. She ties Trump directly to every prong of the insurrection, including the violence. What do you make of where DOJ appears to be from what is outward facing?
I think one example, perhaps the single biggest example of the impact that the Select Committee is having on the Justice Department's probe was securing Cassidy Hutchinson's cooperation and broadcasting it publicly in full. It seems, given the timeline and what's known publicly about the timing of the Justice Department reaching out to Hutchinson, it's not crazy to think that it would have taken DOJ much longer to reach her, if they reached her at all, had the Select Committee investigation not happened. There's just no question whatsoever that their broadcasting of her testimony had a big impact, in addition to securing her full cooperation, which also was not a foregone conclusion. In addition to that, I think what we also have to keep in mind when it comes to this timeline is that the Select Committee and DOJ seem to have been starting in opposite places. Not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a bit of an inversion here where the Select Committee was very clear, basically from day one, that they were interested in Trump himself, Trump's specific role, while the Justice Department from day one was focused on the violence. The first charges that they brought, the first literally hundreds of cases they brought, were targeting people who violently attacked law enforcement officers around the Capitol building, who ransacked that building itself. Of course, now we know both investigations are looking at both topics, but because they've come at it from different vantage points, you have these timelines that are really different. And that points back, frankly, to the comments that Merrick Garland made in his interview with Lester Holt just a few days ago. There will be things DOJ finds that Congress doesn't find. There will be things Congress finds that DOJ hasn't found. They're operating in different modes, different perspectives, and in the long run, this is likely to result in getting a more complete, more full picture of what happened, although in the short run, it certainly creates contrast that can be a little bit jarring.